World this week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents. And joining us this week, Jonathan Randall, journalist, author of Osama, among other things. Thanks for being with us again.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us, Ron Linker, Paris correspondent for Dutch public broadcaster. Do you say NOS or NOS?
NOS.
NOS, there you go. And Vibeke Knoop, Rascheling, Paris correspondent for Norway's leading daily newspaper, Aftenpost. Thank you for being with us. And Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review, which you can find at worldpoliticsreview.com. Thanks for being with us.
Getting better,
The World This Week, where you can always weigh in on the conversation throughout the week on Facebook and on Twitter, our handle at François F24. And the big story we've been following all week is one that has this nation coming to grips with the damage done by a homegrown extremist, Mohamed Merah, 23, from a broken home in the southwestern city of Toulouse, a juvenile delinquent who, after 2 trips to the tribal regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan, became the alleged shooter on the scooter. After twice targeting French soldiers, his cold-blooded attack on young children and their teacher at a Jewish school, stunning the French nation and the planet as a whole. A nationwide manhunt culminating in a 32-and-a-half-hour siege, a final shootout that left 2 police injured and the suspect dead. This Friday, an ecumenical march in Toulouse. Toulouse, a cosmopolitan city known for cuisine, its aeronautics industry, and its love of rugby. People wondering how a nice middle-class suburb could breed such a monster. Ron Linker, you were there. That, again, people in the neighborhood dumbfounded.
Yes, absolutely. We spoke to some people there who actually met him even on Saturday, so that was in between several shootings. And they say he was a nice guy, a friendly guy, a polite guy. He made a lot of jokes. So they thought they knew him, but now they're saying, well, we absolutely did not know him. And, everybody in that neighborhood was as shocked as I think France was.
Judah Grunstein, what are some of the lessons you've learned as we begin to piece together who exactly is Mohamed Merah?
Well, to begin with, I think it's important to start with the fact that this is extremely rare, thankfully. This was a horrific act, and one of the reasons why it was so shocking is that it hasn't occurred before here in France. In Spain, there was the bombing, in London as well. That hasn't taken place since 9/11 in France. So there's that to remember. I think that in terms of lessons to be drawn, there's the question of the information trail that existed and how complicated and difficult it still is, even 11 years after this sort of global effort to improve counter-terrorist techniques, how difficult it is to make sure the right information has been combined in enough databases so that there's a real vision or picture of a potential suspect. That said, until Mohamed Merah actually committed these crimes and actually passed into action, there was nothing to predict really that he was capable of that. In other words, it's sort of unfortunately the kind of crime that's very hard to predict and very hard to preempt.
Jonathan Randall, this story, as Judah was saying, began as a simple crime story, since it was French soldiers who'd been shot. Then there was, 4 days later, French soldiers shot again, and that's when people went, this is not something...
Well, I think it's atypical in that, and interesting, because now that we know who the shooter was, Al-Qaeda, and not just Al-Qaeda, but jihadist groups in general, and that's very important to point out that the Al-Qaeda angle, if anything, may have been exaggerated so far, that the French, all these sites, all the propaganda was France is a legitimate target because it has troops in Afghanistan. Footnote here, what's interesting is the French under Sarkozy have begun withdrawing troops. They withdrew 400 last year, more coming out this year. Hollande, who was the challenger to Sarkozy, he said he'd get all the troops out by the end of this year if he's elected. So that was peculiar. It's also interesting that not just the victims were not just French soldiers, but it happened to be Muslim French soldiers. They were, like the shooter himself, second generation, French-born. They were Boers. In other words, they were supposed to be integrated. They were integrated into French society. The proof was they joined the army. Interesting also that the shooter tried to get into the Foreign Legion and tried to get into the army. He was rejected because of his petty delinquent record as a young boy. So that you can see army in the eyes of the jihadists a legitimate target, and did he know that the soldiers he would shoot were Muslims? I don't know, but it was also very interesting that they happened to be victims. As for the Jewish school, that was one of the founding doctrines of jihadi terrorism is that the Israeli treatment of Palestinians is the absolute default position. When every other justification for Islamic terrorism fails, the default position is always and Palestine, and the fact that could be linked with the Jewish school, the oppression in the eyes of the jihadists, as at least they see it, of Palestine made the school, in the shooter's mind at least, a legitimate target. And as I say, it was sort of part of the founding doctrine of radical jihadi terrorism going back 20 years now.
But it was interesting that he improvised that attack on the Jewish school. He was planning to shoot another soldier, but then he was too late to shoot him, and then he knew the area and said,
next door.
"Let's go to the Jewish school." So,
And those two trips to Afghanistan were way.
Yes, but I was going to say exactly the same, that the Minister of Interior, Mr. Guéant, confirmed this, that he didn't mean to attack this Jewish school, but he did so because he missed the other target. And I have the very impression today that his main, reason for doing this is not so much linked to terrorism as a personal vengeance, because he didn't manage to join the army, and that is what he wanted to do most of all.
We're seeing that Merah had been, something in my throat. Merah had been to Kandahar on one of his two trips. Mm-hmm. Kandahar, where there's a U.S. Army Staff Sergeant who's due to be indicted this Friday for killing on 17 counts of murder, 6 of attempted murder, and the American soldier is being called different things, but what he's not being called is what the French press have called this young man a terrorist. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be a bit of a double standard when it comes to that label. You and I were discussing it earlier in the week when it came to Anders Breivik in your country, yes. Norway.
Yes, in the beginning of the week, when all this started, we could see similar patterns between Merah and Breivik in Norway. They were both planning their actions very cautiously. They were both very cold-blooded. They did some extremely cruel things. I mean, Merah, one of the children, a little girl in the Jewish school, he drew her after her hair to shoot her at a closer and film. You know, he filmed all the things. And
some people thought it was a neo-Nazi.
Yes, and Breivik, he also did some extremely cruel things when on this island in Norway last year. So it was, natural to think that they had things in common, and I still think they have things in common, but of course they don't have the same ideology.
I'd like to just disagree pretty vehemently with the idea that there's a parallel between the U.S. soldier and Merah. There's a parallel in the sense that they were both psychopaths that murdered.
But in the one case, they employ the word terrorist, in the other case they don't.
A soldier that loses it and that goes on a killing spree like that without any political ideology or without any political motive, I don't think can be called a terrorist. And not only that, the difference is also that the U.S. military arrested and is prosecuting him for murder, whereas Mohammed Merah, if he were repatriated to the camps, the camps where he trained in Afghanistan and Pakistan, he would be celebrated for having successfully accomplished his goal. So the distinction, I think, is very important. It's true that there is collateral damage in the war in Afghanistan, and there is always soldiers that lose it and go off into murderous sprees like that. There was even a whole battalion or a whole squad of American soldiers that went on trophy killings. The difference is that that's not the mission of the U.S. Army, and when those people are caught, they're punished by the U.S. Army. Whereas Merah's mission was to kill innocent people as part of a political ideology.
Assuming that he did get orders from above.
Well, maybe even if he was deciding his own battle plan, it's within the larger context. The one thing I would say is that I think there is a direct parallel in terms of the way in which the extreme right psychopathic killers and the jihadi psychopathic killers, if you change one word here or there in terms of the reasoning behind why they hate their particular victim, it's generally motivated by the same kind of paranoid or vengeance-oriented program.
What's interesting to me in this case is the case of Breivik, because there was an enormous effort to catch him alive and put him on trial. What disturbs me somewhat in the case of Merah was the French government's decision in the middle of a political campaign to take a decision which inevitably, it seems to me, was going to end up killing the man. And it would have been interesting to find out who this man really was, what his real motivation was, how he collected all these arms, what funding, where he was trained. What?
It's a huge loss in terms of intelligence,
well, exactly.
in terms of what he could have provided.
I add also that when I did my book on bin Laden, I came to respect the French enormously for being miles ahead of the Americans as of 2001, as of 9/11, and very, very careful, very thorough intelligence operatives. And I'm worried. I mean, it worries me that here was this chance to have caught him, and they just could have waited.
Instead of intercepting him, we wound up with this siege situation.
Well,
what is
worse
important?
than that? I think it's that there was there's another tick-tock in all this, which is part of any act of terrorism is publicity. Terrorists do things, and they want everybody in the world to talk about it. So the longer this man was alive, not under control, the worse it might have seemed for the French government. And once again, I'm obliged to say, France is in the middle of a political campaign.
Let's pick up on that point. We're less than a month from the first round of the presidential election. As you can imagine, the spin varies wildly according to political tendencies. The conservative daily Le Figaro this Friday, headlines across its front page, "Mission accomplished," while Libération spells out 7 questions about the ordeal with the headline, "Gray areas unanswered." That coupled with an unflattering photo, it seems, of the interior minister. And there was the issue of the major candidates, most of them, suspending their political campaign, and the French president, after the Jewish school shooting, ordering a minute of silence in all the schools across the country. Judah Grunstein, as a father, what did you think of that?
Well, I'll say I was probably most struck by the entire event and most touched by the entire event as a father, more than in terms of the societal implications or the political implications. In terms of the moment of silence in the school, I think that's valid. I think it's actually probably healthy for children of certain ages to sort of feel a sense of solidarity and a sense that the entire country is thinking of them in a sense and is thinking of their protection and their security in that way. I'm not sure how well it was explained. And I also, just to the larger question of suspending the campaigns, you can't suspend a political campaign. That's just impossible. So even in suspending it, it's a political act.
Vibeke,
Yes, I just wanted to add one thing to what you said just a moment ago, because before I came here, I just saw that the body of Mera was full of bullets, and he was not only killed by one shot, but by two shots, one in the head and one through his stomach. So here, I think there is something that they haven't told us the exact truth. And I also think that all this case leaves open a lot of questions. As for the political campaign, Norway was also in a political campaign last year. Not for presidency, we don't have a president, but it was local elections. And all the parties agreed to suspend the campaign and suspended it, and almost until the elections, they just did 1 week more symbolic. And I think also there was a huge difference in the reaction of Norway and France, because in the hours after the attack last year, the Prime Minister of Norway, Mr. Stoltenberg, said, we will not let Breivik win. We will keep our values and we will answer to his actions by more democracy, more tolerance, and more openness. And that's what happened. And I think here in France, they are doing exactly the contrary.
Well, you know,
they're doing the contrary. We're going to have to take a break. But and certainly we'll be seeing in the weeks to come, less than a month to go before that presidential election, whether or not the tone of the campaign will become a little less caustic after this ordeal. Stay with us. The World This Week continues.